I've always hated November. Not the poetic, golden kind of autumn people like to photograph, but the real one. The late, exhausted autumn when the trees stand naked, the sky hangs low and grey for weeks, and cold rain taps endlessly against the windows. Everything feels damp, heavy, and tired. Even the air seems soaked in melancholy. Maybe that's why November has always been the hardest month for me emotionally. Work slows down, daylight disappears before you even finish your coffee, and you start feeling trapped inside your own thoughts. I work remotely as a tailor and seamstress, taking private orders from home. It started as a necessity years ago when my youngest child was born, but eventually sewing became more than work. It turned into my refuge. Designing dresses, fixing jackets, restoring old clothes people didn't want to throw away, it calmed me, gave me something solid and real to focus on. Most days my house is loud and chaotic. 2 kids, a constantly busy husband, endless chores, noise, cooking, laundry, the usual family routine. Silence is a rare luxury. But that Saturday, late in November, something unusual happened. My husband took the kids to visit his parents in another town. They were supposed to stay overnight and come back Sunday evening. For the first time in months, maybe even years, the entire house was mine. No cooking. No cleaning after anyone. No cartoons playing in the background. No arguments over toys or homework. Just silence. We don't have pets either, so the house felt almost unreal in its quietness. Outside, cold rain drummed steadily on the roof, and wind rattled the bare branches in the garden. I made myself tea, wrapped up in a warm sweater, and sat down at my sewing machine in the living room. A soft yellow lamp glowed over the table while the rest of the house stayed in comfortable dimness. I was working on a winter coat for a regular client, enjoying the rare peace, letting myself fully sink into my hobby. The rhythmic hum of the sewing machine mixed with the sound of rain. It was cozy, almost hypnotic. For a while, everything felt perfect. Until, somewhere between adjusting the fabric and changing the thread, I suddenly realized something was wrong. That strange instinct you can't explain when your body reacts before your mind understands why. A sudden awareness. A feeling that you are not alone. At first, I tried to brush it off. Old house noises, wind, pipes, imagination. Living in a private house, you get used to random creaks and sounds, especially in bad weather. But the uneasiness didn't go away. It grew stronger. The feeling was so clear it made my hands freeze over the fabric. My skin prickled, and a cold wave slowly crawled up my back. Someone else was in the house. I turned off the sewing machine and held my breath, listening. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Only rain outside. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, distinct footsteps coming from the kitchen. My stomach dropped. Who could that possibly be? If I lived in an apartment, I would have blamed the neighbors, footsteps through walls, elevators, doors slamming. Normal city noise. But this was a standalone house. And I was supposed to be completely alone. Then, from the kitchen, came a loud, heavy sigh. Not a random creak. Not wind rattling something loose. A human sigh. Deep. Tired. Close. That was the moment my nerves finally snapped. I couldn't just sit there pretending anymore. My heart was pounding so hard it almost hurt, but fear mixed with a strange, stubborn determination. I grabbed the biggest pair of fabric scissors from the table, long, heavy, sharp enough to cut through thick coat material and, trying to look braver than I felt, marched toward the kitchen. In my head, I half-jokingly imagined myself as the heroine of some cheap horror movie, stupidly going to investigate instead of running away. "Hello," I called out loudly, my voice sounding braver than I actually felt. "Who's there?" No answer. Only silence and the steady drumming of rain outside. I flicked on the kitchen light. The room was empty. The table stood exactly as we'd left it after breakfast. Dishes washed. Chairs neatly pushed in. Nothing moved. No open windows. No intruders hiding in corners. But the sound, the breathing, continued. Another long, heavy exhale echoed somewhere above. I froze, listening. And then it hit me, the realization so obvious I almost laughed out loud. The roof. Rain and wind had picked up outside, and strong gusts were blowing straight into the heating boiler chimney. The air moving through the pipe created a low, hollow sound uncannily similar to someone sighing. Wind. Just wind. I let out my own shaky breath, feeling both relieved and slightly embarrassed by my overreaction. My imagination had simply run wild in an empty house. Great detective work, I muttered to myself. To chase away the lingering uneasiness, I turned the television on in the living room and cranked up the volume a little higher than usual. Human voices filled the house again, making everything feel normal and safe. Soon the earlier fear felt almost silly. I returned to my sewing machine and finished working on the coat, enjoying the comforting rhythm of stitching fabric together. Time slipped by unnoticed. I finally shut off the TV around 10 in the evening. Early? Maybe for some people. But I've always been a morning person. A convinced early bird. I usually wake up around 6 without any alarm clock, and by lunchtime I've already done half the day's work: cooking, cleaning, answering clients, finishing orders. Late nights and I simply don't get along. I locked the doors, checked the windows, turned off the lights, and went to bed, feeling calm again. Outside, the storm kept raging, wind rattling branches and rain tapping on the roof, but inside the house everything seemed safe and quiet. Normally, I sleep like a rock. Once I'm out, nothing wakes me until morning. But not that night. Sometime around 4 in the morning, still half asleep, I heard the faint clinking of dishes. A light, irregular sound. Like cups or glasses gently knocking against each other. At first, I didn't even open my eyes. My brain hovered somewhere between dream and reality, lazily trying to figure out the source of the noise. The kitchen again. For a second, the idea of someone being in the house flickered through my mind, but exhaustion quickly smothered the thought. Getting out of the warm bed into the cold hallway felt like too much effort. So, still wrapped in the blanket, I applied my now well-practiced nighttime logic. Under our refrigerator, one of the wooden leveling boards sometimes slipped out of place. When the compressor kicked in, the fridge vibrated slightly, and bottles in the door would clink against each other. That had to be it. Problem solved. Satisfied with my explanation, I turned onto my other side, pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders, and allowed sleep to pull me back under. And just when I was finally drifting back into sleep, when thoughts dissolve and dreams begin to take over, something happened that snapped me awake in an instant. I suddenly felt someone climbing over me in bed. Not a dream. Not that falling sensation you sometimes get while sleeping. This felt physical. Real. The mattress shifted slightly under weight. The blanket tugged. Something moved across my legs and torso, carefully, as if trying not to wake me. Later, thinking about it, I realized that when half asleep, the brain desperately tries to find logical explanations for impossible things. In that foggy, sleepy state, my first thought was simple. My daughter. She sometimes had a habit of sneaking into our bed in the middle of the night after watching something scary. She'd quietly crawl in beside me and fall asleep, seeking comfort. So even while half asleep, annoyed but still motherly, I almost sighed in resignation, thinking she'd come again to sleep next to me. But then, within seconds, my mind caught up with reality. My daughter wasn't home. Neither was anyone else. The house was empty. The realization hit like ice water. And meanwhile, whatever it was finished climbing over me and settled behind my back. I felt the mattress sink slightly. Then something draped over me. An arm. And a leg. As if someone lay behind me and casually wrapped themselves around my body in a sleepy embrace. A perfectly familiar, domestic gesture. Except it was impossible. My entire body went rigid under the blanket. My heart started pounding so loudly I could hear blood rushing in my ears. I was awake now. Fully awake. Every instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong, that this situation simply could not exist. Still frozen, afraid to move, I forced the words out. "Who are you?" My voice sounded small in the dark bedroom. For a brief second, there was silence. Then, right next to my ear, I heard a whisper. Soft. Calm. Almost intimate. "It's me." That was the breaking point. My eyes flew open on their own, and I jerked around, twisting in bed so fast the blanket tangled around my legs. The space behind me was empty. Completely empty. No one in the room. No shape. No shadow. Nothing. Just the faint grey outline of furniture in pre-dawn darkness. For several seconds, I couldn't even breathe. My brain desperately tried to catch up with what had just happened, replaying the sensation again and again. The weight. The arm. The whisper. But the bed behind me was untouched. No one there. Panic finally took over. I threw off the blanket, jumped out of bed, and almost ran to the kitchen, turning on lights as I went. I didn't even check the rest of the house. I simply needed distance from that room. In the kitchen, I switched on every light and sat down at the table with my back pressed firmly against the wall, staring at the doorway as if expecting something to appear at any moment. My hands were shaking. I stayed like that for almost 40 minutes, trying to understand what had just happened. Trying to convince myself it was sleep paralysis, a dream, imagination, anything logical. But one thing disturbed me the most. The whisper. No matter how hard I tried to recall it, I couldn't determine whose voice it was. It wasn't clearly male. It wasn't clearly female. It sounded neutral, almost familiar, yet belonging to no one I actually knew. And somehow, that made it even worse. Strangely enough, whatever had happened in the bedroom hadn't felt violent. No one tried to choke me. Nothing attacked me. I hadn't felt threatened in a direct, physical way. So why was I so terrified? Sitting in the brightly lit kitchen, back pressed to the wall, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was all exhaustion, stress, imagination mixed with half-sleep hallucinations. The human brain is capable of producing incredibly realistic sensations when it's caught between sleep and wakefulness. Still, sleep was now completely impossible. My heart kept racing, and every creak of the house made me jump. The idea of going back to bed felt absurd. I looked at the clock. Too early to call anyone. Too early to leave. Too early for anything normal. And then a ridiculous thought came to mind. Well, if I'm awake anyway, why not finally do the deep cleaning I'd been postponing for weeks? It sounded almost comforting. Something normal. Something practical. Something that belonged to the ordinary world. So I stood up, made myself another cup of tea, and decided to start with the bathroom. The cold tiles under my feet and the bright white bathroom light helped ground me. Cleaning always calmed my nerves. Order replacing chaos. I started putting bottles and cosmetics back in place, wiping surfaces, reorganizing shelves. Gradually my breathing slowed, and my thoughts became clearer. Until I heard it. A soft, sliding rustle behind me. At first, I thought it was just the sound of plastic packaging or maybe something falling over. But the noise continued. Slow. Steady. As if something was moving. I turned around. And froze. The shower curtain above the bathtub was slowly sliding along the rod. On its own. The plastic rings moved one by one with a soft whispering sound, exactly like when someone standing inside the tub gently pulls the curtain closed. Except no one was there. The movement was calm. Unhurried. Almost deliberate. My brain immediately started searching for an explanation. But there wasn't one. The curtain rod was installed perfectly level. No tilt, no slope. And its surface wasn't slippery either. To move the curtain, you normally had to pull it. Hard enough. And I was standing several steps away. I hadn't touched it. Hadn't brushed against it. Nothing could have accidentally moved it. Yet the curtain continued sliding until it fully closed. Silence followed. My heart pounded in my throat as I slowly stepped closer and pulled the curtain aside. Of course, no one stood in the bathtub. No footprints. No movement. Nothing at all. An empty tub. That was the moment when real panic hit. I rushed out of the bathroom and nearly ran back into the kitchen, again taking my defensive position with my back against the wall, staring at the dark hallway leading from the bathroom. Something inside me cracked then. I've always considered myself rational, skeptical, someone who looks for logical explanations first. Ghost stories, paranormal tales, those were things other people believed in. Not me. But now, Logic felt thin and fragile. I kept waiting for someone or something to step out of the bathroom. But nothing happened. Minutes passed in complete silence. Finally, gathering what little courage I had left, I made a decision. I wouldn't stay in that house another minute. Moving sideways down the hallway, afraid to turn my back on the bathroom, I slipped into the bedroom, threw on whatever clothes I grabbed first, and stuffed my essentials into a bag. Outside, the sky was still dark with the first pale hints of dawn. It didn't matter. Despite the early hour, I left the house. The cold morning air hit my face as I stepped outside, and only then did my chest loosen slightly. The open space felt safer than those walls. I locked the door with shaking hands and drove away without even knowing where exactly I was going. I ended up spending the entire day at a large shopping and entertainment center across town, wandering between stores, drinking coffee after coffee just to stay around people and noise. At some point, I called my family and, still shaken, told them everything that had happened during the night. My voice trembled as I described the footsteps, the whisper, the curtain. Even saying it out loud made it sound unreal. But the fear I felt had been very, very real. When I finally called my husband, still shaken and exhausted, his reaction was exactly what you'd expect from someone who had slept peacefully through the night. "Oh, come on," he laughed. "You probably just had a bad dream." "It wasn't a dream," I insisted, gripping my phone tighter. "I know the difference between sleeping and being awake." He chuckled again, clearly not taking my panic seriously. "So you're telling me ghosts came to visit while we were gone?" "I'm telling you," I snapped, trying to keep my voice steady, "that I'm not going back home until you and the kids are there. Period." There was a pause on the line, then his tone shifted into playful teasing. "But you promised to bake a pie this weekend." "Forget the pie," I shot back. "You'll survive without it." "I'm scared, okay?" I rubbed my temple, trying to explain what exactly frightened me so much. "I swear, if I drove up to the house right now and saw the curtains moving in the windows, I'd lose my mind." He sighed dramatically. "So what exactly are you afraid of?" "That's the problem," I admitted quietly. "I don't even know. I just, There was another short silence, then his voice softened slightly. "Maybe you should stop watching horror movies before bed. You wind yourself up, and then your imagination runs wild. Very funny. Seriously. Relax. Nothing's there. Otherwise you'll start seeing things that aren't even real." The conversation ended with more jokes than sympathy, and I sat there feeling both foolish and frustrated. Part of me understood why he reacted that way. From the outside, my story sounded ridiculous. But the fear I'd felt inside that house had been real. Very real. So I waited in the shopping center until evening, wandering through stores, sitting in cafes, watching crowds of strangers just to avoid being alone. Only when my family finally called to say they were home did I gather the courage to return. The house looked perfectly normal when I pulled into the driveway. Warm lights glowed in the windows, voices and laughter spilled out as soon as I opened the door. Safety. Normal life. But instead of sympathy, I was greeted with cheerful teasing. "Well, did our brave ghost hunter survive?" my husband joked. The kids giggled. My mother-in-law, who had come along with them, shook her head with a smile. "Maybe you weren't sewing last night," someone added. "Maybe you were tasting something stronger than tea." Everyone laughed. I forced a smile, but inside I felt stung. Being scared is one thing. Being laughed at for it is another. Feeling both tired and slightly offended, I gave up trying to convince anyone and went to bed early. The next day at work, I shared the story with my coworkers, mostly as a funny anecdote. People laughed, made jokes, offered theories about imagination, stress, and horror movies. Only one colleague didn't laugh. He listened quietly, arms crossed, nodding occasionally. When everyone else finished joking, he said very seriously, "A lava tried to attach itself to you." The room burst into laughter again, but he didn't smile. "In folklore," he continued calmly, "it's an energy parasite. Feeds on fear and exhaustion. Happened to me once, years ago. Something similar." I stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or feel uneasy. "A lava? Sure. Why not?" Well, I finally said, trying to keep things light, if that's true, then it failed. Maybe I ran too fast. That earned another round of laughter, and the conversation moved on. And honestly, nothing strange happened after that. Not that day. Not the following weeks. The house stayed quiet. Nights were normal again. No footsteps, no whispers, no moving curtains. Life returned to routine. But even now, sometimes in late November, when rain taps against the windows and the house feels too quiet, I remember how it felt to wake up thinking someone was holding me in the dark. Over time, the whole episode turned into nothing more than a family joke. Whenever the conversation drifted toward strange stories or someone mentioned ghosts or horror movies, my husband would grin and say, "Careful, or she'll start seeing things again." The kids loved retelling the story to guests, exaggerating it more each time. In their version, mysterious shadows chased me through the house and invisible monsters tried to grab me in the night. Eventually, even I started laughing along. Life moved on. Work, family routines, school problems, deadlines, everyday worries, all the normal things pushed that strange night further and further into the background. Months passed. Nothing unusual ever happened again. So why am I suddenly telling this story now? Because last night, something reminded me of it. It was an ordinary evening. One of those calm domestic moments that blend together, dinner finished, kids in their rooms, my husband scrolling through his phone in the living room, the television murmuring quietly somewhere in the background. I stood at the sink washing dishes, warm water running over my hands, steam fogging the window slightly. Outside, evening darkness pressed against the glass, the neighborhood already quiet. And, as usual, I was humming to myself. I have this silly habit when I'm doing routine chores, especially washing dishes, I start singing nonsense songs under my breath. Completely made-up melodies, words that don't exist in any language, just random sounds that help pass the time. My own little harmless quirk. I didn't even notice I was doing it, lost in my thoughts about work, tomorrow's errands, what to cook for dinner next week. Then, behind me, I heard it. The soft clinking of cups. Glass gently tapping against glass. Right behind my back.